Shabbat Shalom. There was a story that grabbed me about 10 days ago at the beginning of the invasion. One of many stories that have come since then. And it was of a woman who was caught in one of the first bombings when they all started. And she became one of the icons of those first few days. And there was a picture of her with bandages on her face, looking very stoic. And she said there was a guardian angel that just helped her narrowly escape. But she said that before the bombing, all she wanted to do was just survive the invasion. Then she added, now that she survived the bombing, she wanted to take up arms to fight against the invaders for the Ukraine. It's been so powerful for us to witness the heroism of the Ukrainians. So many stories, seeing Ukrainians fly in from abroad, from all over the world, 50,000 to defend their homeland, and doing whatever it takes. And their president, Zelensky, truly a heroic leader. And it was clear from the very beginning that what they were fighting for, and what this is all about, is very simply their freedom. For liberty, freedom from living under a dictator. And it's also why so many of us have rallied for it and are willing to send resources and support sanctions against Russia, that we're touched by the freedom of the Ukrainians and worried about letting a world power simply take and grab a less powerful country. We see plainly what's happening and know that it's worth fighting for. As the president of Ukraine said, he does not want to lift out but ammunition to be able to fight for the freedom of his people. And there were those reports that said at the beginning of this process there were still some European governments that were not sure how to weigh their sanctions and what to bring to bear or not. But then Zelensky joined in a call and he said, we are fighting for not just our country, but for the values of all of us. We're fighting for European values. We're fighting for democratic values. This may be the last time you see me alive. And according to the reports, that shifted the attitudes, and suddenly governments began to wake up, and even Switzerland, known for being a neutral presence and power, and whenever there's a conflict, decided to freeze Russian assets. And we know that probably a lot more will be needed to save the Ukraine. So our portion this morning, as we've been reading, is all about the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And the Mishkan had a name that we very rarely think about, but that we find at the very beginning of the Parsha. The Mishkan was called Mishkan HaEdut, the tabernacle of testimony. So what does that mean, the tabernacle of testimony? So, our sages answer, because the tabernacle, just like the temple afterwards, and all of our synagogues, Temple Har Zion, are places of testimony. Testimony to what? Testimony to the story that have brought the children of Israel to be able to freely worship their God in that tabernacle. The story of their freedom. It was a testimony to how they had left Egypt and defeated Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, leaving their powerful slave masters in ruins behind them, and they were able to march to freedom. And the story that we all know from Passover of how Pharaoh would not let them leave, and even after the 10 plagues had humbled Egypt, he still brought together his armored chariots that were a very powerful force in the ancient world to try and bring back the runaway slaves. But we know Pharaoh was defeated and his armies were vanquished, and then we were set free. And so why was it called the tabernacle of testimony? Because the very fact that it existed was testimony to that story, that that small nation of slaves had been freed and were able to now worship freely. And this is still, to some degree, what our places of worship do. They're a testimony to our survival through 4,000 years, and to the fact that we're born out of freedom. And there must have been moments in that long history when our faith and belief in that testimony must have felt very challenging through all the struggles that we've had to endure. But Jews nonetheless still held on to that testimony. One could say perhaps that in our modern day, the establishment of the State of Israel really revitalized our belief in that testimony, and that testimony to the power of freedom in our world, to allow liberty and to allow even the smallest of peoples to worship freely. And the testimony is obviously not just one of the names for our places of worship, but it's also that story, a part of everything that we do. As we know, it's enshrined in the holiday of Passover. We lean as free people. We relive the experience and those miracles. And also Purim, 10 days from now, is also a story of that freedom, how Mordechai and Esther, against all odds, defeated the powerful Haman and King Ahasuerus, who had issued an order to kill all Jews, but they were able to overturn that. And that was another chapter in that testimony, another chapter in the testimony of how powerful the forces of freedom in our world can be. But when we think of testimony, testimony sounds like a very passive word to us. It just means we just have to bear witness and watch. But testimony, the way our tradition understands it, is not only about watching. It's not just passive. We sit there and watch what history brings to us. Testimony is also about a partnership and what we do within it, a meeting place. Just as in the story of Purim, Esther and Mordechai had to play their part. We pray that the universe comes to our aid, but they had to do their part. And Esther, this is maybe the most important part of that entire book. Esther has to show her courage and face the king, even though she knows that if she comes unannounced to the king, she may lose her life. But her uncle Mordechai says, "Do not think that you have not been placed in this role of queen just for this purpose. And if we fall, you will also fall. But if God needs someone to fulfill this purpose, then someone else will be found." And our testimony to this truth is also found in the cornerstone of the Jewish people. And what was the very first mitzvah that the people received after crossing the Red Sea? It was Shabbat. And what is Shabbat? Shabbat is a symbol, between me and between you forever, for everlasting, that we can be free, we can rest. Not only we can rest, but we can give rest to all those in who we have power to help them rest. Even our animals were commanded should have rest on Shabbat. That we will all rest fully and give rest. Shavat vayi nafash. We'll stop and take a deep breath. And so as we worship this morning in synagogue, in our synagogue, and in synagogues across this country and across the world, this synagogue that's an ancestor to the original Mishkan Haydu, to the tabernacle of testimony, that bears testimony still to this day that we, the small nation of slaves, are still around, still here, still freely worshiping despite everything. We bear testimony to that and to the fact that generation after generation, there have been those that have stood up to stop it, ours or also other small nations' freedom. And we wanted to say that your freedom is just an illusion, and in this world the powerful will always defeat the powerless. But we bear testimony that is not always how it ends. And our beautiful synagogues throughout America are a testimony to the fact that our freedom is well and alive, even everything that we have had to confront. And so it's a partnership. We are also now being called to go out and do what we can to support freedom of those who are having to battle for it. With loud voices, however we can. My wife, Rachel, she called our senator just a few days ago. She said, I am a pacifist, but I am not sure how we'll be able to stop this without boots on the ground. And she wanted me to add, not necessarily to fight, but just to have a presence, because she believes that would stop what's happening. We all have our different views, our different ways that we hope this will end, but we can all bear testimony that there should be an end to tyrants trying to take over the freedom of others. And there will be many more protests and other ways for all of us to show our support in the weeks and months ahead. And to bear that we too are part of that testimony. Just like our holiest of holidays recount in their story, and just like our very places of worship testify to, that we have a belief that freedom and the peace are possible. And that with our voices and with our actions, that one day humanity will find peace, and the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and the world will know peace. Shabbat Shalom.